They were told the Americans would execute them on sight. No mercy for women who had served the Third Reich, they said. No forgiveness for those who wore the gray-green uniforms of the Wehrmacht auxiliaries. When the train doors finally stopped closing behind them in the chaos of April 1945-89, German women believed they were being transported to their deaths. The boxcar smelled of rust and old grain. The floor was bare wood. There were no seats, no water, no food, just bodies pressed together in the darkness and the grinding screech of iron wheels on iron rails. 12 days later, when American soldiers pried open those same doors in a railway yard outside Frankfurt, what they found stopped them cold. The women inside were not standing. Most could not even lift their heads. Some had died days earlier, their bodies propped against the walls by those still clinging to life. The living looked like ghosts, sunken eyes, cracked lips black with thirst, skin stretched over bones. And the smell, oh God, the smell of human waste, death, and desperation hung in the air like a curse. One soldier, a farm boy from Iowa named Thomas Riley, would later write to his mother, "I thought I had seen everything this war could show me. But when I looked into that train car, I realized I had seen nothing. These were not soldiers, they were girls, and somebody had left them to die like animals." If you find these untold stories of World War II meaningful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. These voices from history deserve to be heard. But this is not a story about death. This is a story about what happened after those doors opened, about what the enemy did when they found their enemy half dead, and about how mercy, unexpected and overwhelming, can break a person in ways that cruelty never could. The train had been abandoned 3 days before the Americans found it. In the final collapse of the German military structure, nobody knew who was supposed to guard it, where it was supposed to go, or even what it carried. It sat on a forgotten siding, rusted wheels locked on the tracks, while the Reich burned around it. April 29th, 1945. The morning was cold, the sky the color of old steel. Private Riley and his squad were searching abandoned rail yards for supplies, weapons, anything the retreating Wehrmacht might have left behind. They had found plenty over the past weeks, crates of ammunition, abandoned panzers with empty fuel tanks, warehouses full of uniforms that would never be worn. War leaves debris, and the Americans had become experts at sifting through it. But when they approached the line of boxcars on the eastern siding, something felt wrong. The air was different. Heavy. Sergeant Marcus Webb stopped first, his nose wrinkling. He had smelled death before. Every soldier had by then. But this was different. This was death mixed with something else. Something living. "You hear that?" Webb asked, raising his hand to halt the squad. They listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint as wind through broken glass, a sound. Not quite a moan, not quite a cry. Something human, but barely. The boxcar doors were sealed with iron bars and heavy chains. Wehrmacht standard procedure for transporting prisoners. Webb called for bolt cutters. While they waited, the sounds from inside grew clearer. Scratching. Weak tapping. The sound of someone trying to knock, but lacking the strength to make a fist. When the cutters arrived, it took 3 men to break the rusted chains. The door resisted at first, swollen in its frame from moisture and neglect. Then it gave way with a shriek of metal, sliding open to reveal the darkness inside. The smell hit them like a physical blow. Riley stumbled backward, his hand flying to his mouth. Webb, harder and more experienced, held his ground, but his face went white. The sergeant had liberated concentration camps. He had walked through Buchenwald just weeks before. He thought he had seen the worst humanity could do. He was wrong. The sunlight poured into the boxcar, illuminating a scene from hell. Bodies, dozens of them. But as Webb's eyes adjusted, he realized with horror that some of the bodies were moving. Hands lifted weakly toward the light. Eyes open, though barely. Mouths moved, though no sound came out. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "They're alive." Not all of them. In the corner, 3 bodies lay absolutely still, their skin waxy and gray, dead for days from the look of it, but the others, maybe 60 or 70 of them, were breathing. Barely breathing, but breathing. And every single one of them was a woman. They wore the remnants of Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms, gray-green skirts and jackets, now filthy and torn. Some had lost their shoes. Others clutched small bags or suitcases, still holding onto. Possessions, even as they starved. Their hair hung in matted tangles. Their faces were skeletal, cheekbones jutting sharp beneath skin stretched tight. One woman, younger than the others, maybe 20 years old, sat propped against the wall near the door. Her eyes were open, staring at the soldiers with an expression that held no hope, no fear, no emotion at all. Just emptiness. Her lips moved. Webb knelt beside her. "Can you speak? Do you speak English?" Her lips kept moving, but no sound came. Her throat was too dry. Webb grabbed his canteen, unscrewed the cap, and tilted it toward her mouth. She flinched as if expecting a blow, but when the water touched her lips, her eyes widened. She grabbed the canteen with both hands, shaking so badly she could barely hold it, and drank. Not gulping. She did not have the strength to gulp, just tiny sips, each one followed by a gasp, as if her body had forgotten how to process liquid. "Get medics," Webb shouted over his shoulder. "Get everyone. We need water, blankets, medical supplies, everything." Within minutes, the rail yard transformed into chaos. Soldiers ran in every direction. A field hospital was called in. Trucks arrived with supplies. Officers who had been coordinating occupation duties now found themselves organizing an emergency rescue operation. One by one, the women were lifted from the boxcar. Most could not walk. Many could not even stand. The medics worked with desperate efficiency, checking pulses, starting IVs, wrapping skeletal bodies in army blankets. Some women cried when they were touched. Others stared in silent disbelief as if unable to process what was happening. The young woman Webb had given water to was among the first carried out. As they lifted her onto a stretcher, she grabbed his wrist. Her grip was weak but insistent. She pulled him close, her cracked lips moving again. This time sound came out, a whisper, harsh and broken. "12 Tage," she said. 12 days. Webb did not speak German, but he understood numbers. He looked back at the boxcar, at the hell they had been living in, and felt his stomach turn. 12 days, locked in darkness, no food, no water, no hope. "You're safe now," he told her, knowing she probably could not understand his words, but hoping she might understand his tone. "You're safe." Her eyes closed. Not in death, but in exhaustion so profound it looked like death. The medics carried her away. By noon, all the survivors had been evacuated. 86 women pulled from that boxcar. 3 dead bodies left behind, to be buried later with whatever dignity could be mustered. The Americans worked through the afternoon, documenting everything, taking photographs, collecting the few possessions the women had carried. Among the items recovered, a small diary, water-stained and filthy, written in German. It would later be translated, revealing the final entries of a woman named Margarete Hoffmann, a radio operator from Hamburg. Her last entry, dated April 26, read simply, "No water for 4 days. Greta died this morning. I think I will be next. I am not afraid, only tired." But Margarete did not die. She was one of the 86 who survived. And what happened to her, and to all of them, in the weeks and months that followed would challenge everything they had been taught about the enemy. The field hospital was a collection of canvas tents set up in a cleared warehouse district. It smelled of antiseptic, canvas, and diesel fuel from the generators powering the medical equipment. The women were carried in on stretchers, one after another, their bodies so light that soldiers remarked they felt like carrying children. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old Army nurse from Philadelphia, had seen her share of suffering. She had treated soldiers with limbs blown off, men with their guts spilling out, boys screaming for their mothers as they died. But when the first stretcher came through the tent flap and she saw what lay on it, she felt something crack inside her chest. The woman on the stretcher could not have weighed more than 70 pounds. Her uniform hung off her like a costume on a skeleton. Her eyes were sunken so deep they looked like holes. Her hair, which had once been blonde, was now a dull gray, matted with filth. But it was her hands that struck Dr. Mitchell the most. They were curled into claws, the fingers bent and rigid from days of trying to scratch through wooden walls. "Set her here," Mitchell said, her voice steady despite the horror she felt. "Gently." They placed the stretcher on an examination table. The woman's eyes tracked Mitchell's movements, but she did not speak. Mitchell wondered if she even could speak anymore. "Can you tell me your name?" Mitchell asked in English, knowing it was futile, but needing to try. No response. Mitchell began the examination. Severe dehydration, malnutrition bordering on starvation, signs of dysentery, possible kidney failure. Her pulse was weak and irregular, her blood pressure barely registrable. This woman was, medically speaking, dying. "Start an IV," Mitchell ordered. "Saline solution, slow drip. Her system can't handle too much at once." As the needle went into her arm, the woman flinched. Her eyes widened. She tried to pull away, but she lacked the strength. Mitchell gently held her arm still. "It's okay," Mitchell said softly. "This will help you, I promise." The woman's eyes filled with tears. Not from pain, from confusion, from the incomprehensible reality of being helped by those she had been taught would show no mercy. Over the next 6 hours, all 86 women were processed through the field hospital. The medical staff worked without rest, starting IVs, administering glucose, checking vitals, wrapping wounds. Every single patient was in critical condition. The doctors gave a grim prognosis. At least a dozen would not survive the night. But the Americans did not accept that prognosis. They called in more supplies, more doctors, more nurses. By midnight, the field hospital had tripled in size, with additional tents erected specifically for the German women. And they were not just given medical care, they were given dignity. After stabilization, each woman was taken to a delousing station. The facility was a converted bathhouse, hastily cleaned and equipped, with hot water and soap, real soap. Not the ersatz gray blocks they had used in Germany, made from clay and chemicals. American soap. White, clean, smelling faintly of lavender. Margaret Hoffman, the radio operator from Hamburg, was conscious when they brought her to the bathhouse. She could walk now, though barely, supported by 2 nurses. When she saw the tiled room, the steam rising from the showers, she stopped. Her mind, clouded by exhaustion and trauma, struggled to process what she was seeing. Showers, hot water. She had heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories about the death camps, about the gas chambers disguised as showers. No, she whispered in German, trying to pull back. 9, bitte 9. One of the nurses, a woman named Helen who had learned a bit of German from her grandmother, understood. She knelt beside Margaret, looking her in the eyes. It's just water, Helen said in slow, careful German. Nur Wasser. You were safe. I promise you were safe. Margaret searched the nurse's face for deception, for cruelty, for any sign of the monsters her government had described. She saw only kindness. It made no sense. Nothing made sense anymore. Slowly, with trembling hands, she allowed them to guide her to the shower. The water was hot. Actually hot. She had not felt hot water in over a year. When it touched her skin, washing away the filth of 12 days in hell, she broke down completely, sobbing. Not from pain, but from relief so overwhelming it felt like breaking. Nurse Helen stayed with her, fully clothed, standing under the spray, holding this enemy woman as she cried. The other nurses did the same for the other women. They washed hair matted with filth. They cleaned wounds. They spoke softly in broken German or gentle English, offering words they hoped would comfort even if not understood. When Margaret finally stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a clean white towel, she caught sight of herself in a fogged mirror. The face that looked back was unrecognizable. Thin. Haunted. But clean. For the first time in 12 days, she was clean. That night the women were given beds. Real beds with mattresses and clean sheets and wool blankets. Each bed had a small table beside it with a glass of water and a bowl of broth. The broth was thin, just chicken stock with a bit of rice, because anything heavier would have made them sick. But it was hot. It was food. Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, the bowl of broth in her hands, staring at it as if it were a hallucination. Around her, other women were doing the same. Some ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. Others could not eat at all, too overwhelmed to swallow. A few wept quietly into their bowls. Dr. Mitchell walked through the ward, checking on each patient. When she reached Margaret's bed, she paused. The young woman was staring at her with an expression of complete bewilderment. Warum? Margaret whispered. Why? Mitchell did not speak German, but she understood the question anyway. Why are you helping us? Why are you being kind? Why are you not punishing us? She sat down on the edge of the bed, something she would never have done in a normal medical situation, but this was not normal. Nothing about this was normal. Because you're human, Mitchell said simply, knowing Margaret would not understand the words, but hoping she might understand the tone. That's all, just human. Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. She nodded, though whether in understanding or simply in acknowledgement, Mitchell could not tell. That night, for the first time in 12 days, all 86 women slept in beds. And for the first time in longer than they could remember, they slept without fear. Recovery was not fast. Recovery was painful, slow, and filled with setbacks. 3 more women died in the first week despite the medical care. Their bodies had been pushed too far, damaged too deeply. The Americans buried them in a military cemetery with full honors, which confused and disturbed the surviving women. Why would the enemy honor their dead? But the remaining 83 clung to life with a determination that surprised even the doctors. Day by day, their bodies began to respond to the care. The IVs brought hydration back to shriveled cells. The carefully portioned meals began to rebuild wasted muscle. Color, faint but real, returned to gray faces. By the second week, most could walk again, though shakily. By the third week, they had been transferred from the field hospital to a converted school building that served as a temporary displaced persons camp. It was not luxurious, but it was clean, warm, and safe. The camp was run by American military police and civilian volunteers from the Red Cross. The women were given proper uniforms to replace their filthy Wehrmacht clothing. Not prison uniforms, just simple civilian dresses, donated from American supply chains. Blue, gray, brown. Nothing fancy, but clean and whole. They were also given tasks. Light work at first, just to give them structure. Helping in the kitchen, folding laundry, organizing supply rooms. The Americans believed that purposeful activity would help them recover psychologically as well as physically. They were right. Margaret Hoffman was assigned to help in the camp library, a small room with donated books in German and English. She spent her days organizing shelves, repairing damaged bindings, and slowly, carefully beginning to read again. The first book she picked up was a German translation of an American novel, The Grapes of Wrath, by John Steinbeck. She had never heard of it. Reading it, she discovered a story about poverty, displacement, and human suffering in America. The idea shocked her. She had been taught that America was a land of endless wealth, where everyone lived in luxury while the rest of the world starved. But this book described Americans who were hungry, desperate, and suffering. It was the first crack in the wall of propaganda she had lived behind her entire life. Other women had similar experiences. Helga Schmidt, a former nurse from Berlin, worked in the camp infirmary alongside American medical staff. She watched them treat German civilians with the same care they gave American soldiers. She watched them use their limited supplies to help people who had, weeks before, been shooting at them. One day, a young American medic named David accidentally cut his hand while opening a crate of supplies. Helga immediately grabbed bandages and began treating the wound. David looked at her in surprise. "You don't have to do that," he said. "You're not required to help us." Helga, whose English was improving, looked at him with confusion. "You are hurt," she said simply. "So I help." David smiled. "Fair enough." That small interaction stayed with Helga, the casualness of it, the normalcy. In her world, in the world she had known, enemies did not treat each other's wounds. Enemies did not smile at each other. Enemies did not exist as individuals, only as symbols of hatred. But here, in this strange camp run by the people she had been taught to fear, she was being forced to see enemies as people, and it was terrifying. The food was another constant shock. 3 meals a day, every day. Breakfast was usually porridge or bread with butter and jam, real butter, real jam. Lunch was soup or stew with vegetables and sometimes meat. Dinner was more substantial. Potatoes, canned vegetables, occasionally chicken or beef. For women who had survived on ersatz coffee and turnip soup for years, who had watched their families starve while the government promised victory was just around the corner, this abundance was incomprehensible. Anna Müller, a 23-year-old former telephone operator from Munich, kept a journal during her time in the camp. Her entry from May 15, 1945, read, "Today they gave us chocolate. American chocolate. I do not remember the last time I had chocolate. Was it 1943? 1942? The taste was so sweet it made my teeth hurt. I ate it slowly, making it last as long as possible. Then I cried because while I was eating chocolate, my mother and sisters are probably digging through rubble in Munich, searching for scraps of food. How can I be here eating chocolate while they starve? What kind of person does that make me?" The guilt was universal. Every woman felt it. They were being fed while their families starved. They were safe while their cities burned. They were receiving kindness from the very people their government had demonized. The contradiction gnawed at them daily. Some dealt with it by withdrawing, speaking to no one, eating mechanically, going through the motions of life without truly living. Others became defiant, insisting loudly that this was all propaganda, that the Americans were only being kind now but would show their true cruelty later. But most, like Margaret and Anna, fell into a confused middle ground. They could not deny the reality of what was happening. The food was real, the beds were real, the medical care was real, the kindness was real. And if all of that was real, then what did it say about everything they had believed before? One evening in late May, a group of women gathered in one of the dormitory rooms. They had been in the camp for 3 weeks now. Their bodies had recovered enough that they no longer looked like walking skeletons. Their cheeks had filled out. Their hair, washed and cut, looked almost normal again. Some had even begun to smile occasionally. But that night the conversation was serious. "Do you think they will punish us eventually?" asked Greta Fischer, a former secretary who had worked in a Wehrmacht communications office. "Maybe they are fattening us up first." Several women murmured agreement. It seemed logical. Why else would the enemy show such generosity? But Helga Schmidt shook her head. "I have been working with their doctors for 3 weeks. I have watched them. They are not pretending. They genuinely care about keeping us alive." "But why?" someone asked. "We are the enemy. We serve the Reich. Why would they care?" Helga hesitated. "I think," she said slowly, "they see us as people first. Not as Germans. Not as enemies. As people." The room fell silent. The idea was so foreign, so contrary to everything they had been taught, that no one knew how to respond. Finally, Anna Müller spoke up. "If that is true," she said quietly, "then everything we were told was a lie." No one argued with her. The transformation did not happen all at once. It was not a single moment of revelation. It was slow, painful, like a bone breaking and resetting. Every day brought new challenges to old beliefs. In early June, the camp received a delivery of letters. The Red Cross had been working to reconnect displaced persons with their families, and some of the women's relatives had been located. The letters were distributed during dinner one evening. Margaret Hoffman received one. The envelope was dirty and worn, passed through multiple hands before reaching her. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single page, written in her mother's handwriting. "My dearest Margaret, I thought you were dead. The authorities told us all the women from your unit had been killed. I have been in mourning for 2 months. But yesterday the Red Cross informed me you are alive and in American custody. I wept for an hour when I received the news. We are surviving here in Hamburg, though the city is destroyed. We eat whatever we can find. Father's health is failing. Your sister married a British soldier last week. I know this will shock you, but we had no choice. He brings us food. Without him, we would starve. Please write back when you can. I love you. I thought I would never say those words to you again. Mother. Margaret read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in her pocket, and walked outside. She found a quiet corner behind one of the buildings and allowed herself to break down completely. Her sister had married a British soldier, the enemy, and her mother, who had spent years praising the Führer and denouncing the Allies, was grateful for it. Because he brought food. How had the world turned so completely upside down? She was not the only one struggling. All across the camp, women were receiving letters that shattered their understanding of reality. Fathers who had been loyal Nazi Party members now cursing Hitler's name. Brothers who had fought on the Eastern Front now disabled and begging on street corners. Mothers thanking God for the American occupation because at least the Americans brought order and food. The cognitive dissonance was unbearable. One night, unable to sleep, Anna Muller sat at a table in the common room and began to write in her journal. The words poured out of her like a confession. I am ashamed. Not of what I did during the war. I was just a telephone operator. I connected calls. I filed papers. I did my job. I am ashamed because I am happy here. I am ashamed because when I think about going home to Germany, to the ruins and the starvation and the despair, I feel dread. I do not want to leave this place, this enemy camp where I am fed and safe and treated like a human being. What kind of German does that make me? What kind of person? My grandmother would be horrified. She used to tell me stories about German strength, German pride, German superiority, and here I am, grateful to my captors, grateful to the people who bombed my city. How can both things be true? How can they be the enemy and also the ones who saved my life? She closed the journal and stared at the wall. There were no answers, only questions that grew heavier every day. In mid-June, something happened that pushed many of the women to a breaking point. The Americans organized a screening in the camp. A projector was set up in the main hall and all the women were asked to attend. No one told them what they would be watching. When the lights dimmed and the footage began to roll, there was initial confusion. The images were black and white, grainy, clearly documentary footage. It showed American soldiers, a camp, barbed wire. Then the camera panned to show what the soldiers had found. Bodies, mountains of bodies, skeletal prisoners in striped uniforms, mass graves, gas chambers, the unmistakable evidence of systematic murder on an industrial scale. The room erupted in gasps. Some women covered their mouths, others turned away. A few ran from the room, unable to watch. Margaret sat frozen in her seat, staring at the screen. The narrator's voice, calm and American, explained what they were seeing. Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. The Nazi concentration camps, the death factories. She had heard rumors during the war. Everyone had heard rumors. Whispers about special camps for Jews and political prisoners. But the rumors had been vague, easy to dismiss as enemy propaganda. Nobody wanted to believe their government was capable of such things. But this was not propaganda. This was footage. Real footage. Taken by American soldiers. Documented. Undeniable. When the screening ended and the lights came back on, the room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of what they had just seen pressed down on them like a physical force. Finally, someone started crying. Then another, then several. Within minutes, the entire room was filled with the sound of women weeping. Not polite tears, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere fundamental. An American officer stood at the front of the room. His name was Colonel James Patterson, and he had been the one to order the screening. He waited until the crying subsided slightly, then spoke. "I showed you this," he said in German, translated by an interpreter. "Not to punish you. Not to make you feel guilty for crimes you did not commit. I showed you this because you deserve to know the truth. About what your government did. About the regime you served." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Most of you were secretaries, nurses, radio operators. You did not pull triggers. You did not open gas chamber doors. But you were part of a machine that made these horrors possible. And now you must decide what you believe. You can reject what you have seen. You can call it lies. Or you can accept the truth and carry it with you." He turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing," he said. "The reason we are treating you with kindness, the reason we give you food and medicine and shelter is not because we have forgotten what Germany did. It is because we refuse to become what Germany became. That is the difference between us." Then he left. The women sat in silence for a long time after that. Some would later claim the footage was fabricated. Some would insist they had known nothing about the camps. But most in the deepest part of themselves knew the truth. They had served a monster. And the people who defeated that monster were showing them more humanity than their own government ever had. That night, Anna Muller wrote one more entry in her journal. I understand now. The soap, the food, the kindness. It is not a trick. It is a lesson. They are showing us what we should have been, what humanity looks like when it is not poisoned by hatred. I thought captivity would destroy me, but it is rebuilding me instead, and I do not know if I will ever forgive myself for needing the enemy to teach me how to be human. By July, the physical transformation of the women was complete. They had gained back the weight they had lost. Their skin glowed with health. Their hair shone. When they looked in mirrors, they saw versions of themselves that had not existed in years. But the psychological transformation was far more profound. One afternoon, Margaret Hoffman was helping to organize donated clothing in one of the storage rooms. She came across a full-length mirror, something she had not seen in months. She stopped and looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was healthy, well-fed, clean. She wore a simple blue dress that actually fit. Her hair was combed and pinned neatly. She looked, Margaret realized with a shock, almost normal, like a person living a normal life. But she was not living a normal life. She was a prisoner of war, in an enemy camp, being fed by the people who had destroyed her country. The contradiction hit her with physical force. She sat down on a nearby crate, staring at her reflection, and felt something inside her shift. Not break, shift, like a bone that had been set wrong, finally clicking into the correct position. They saved us, she whispered to the empty room. The enemy saved us. It was the first time she had said it out loud. The first time she had allowed herself to fully acknowledge it. Not just the physical rescue from the train car, but the bigger rescue. The rescue from propaganda. From lies. From a worldview built on hatred and superiority. Dr. Mitchell found her there 20 minutes later, still sitting on the crate, tears streaming down her face. Are you all right? Mitchell asked, kneeling beside her. Margaret looked at her. Her English had improved over the past months. Not fluent, but functional. You make me better, she said slowly. Not just body, inside. You make me see truth. Mitchell understood. She had seen this transformation in many of the women. The moment when they stopped seeing Americans as the enemy and started seeing them as people. The moment when their entire worldview collapsed and had to be rebuilt from scratch. It takes courage, Mitchell said gently, to change what you believe, to admit you were wrong. Most people never manage it. Margaret nodded. It is hard, she said. Very hard, but necessary. That evening, Margaret gathered some of the other women in the common room. Anna was there. Helga, Greta, a dozen others who had become friends through shared suffering and shared revelation. I want to say something, Margaret began. Her voice was quiet but steady. We have been here for 3 months. 3 months of being fed and cared for by people we were taught to hate. And I think we need to acknowledge what that means. The room was silent, everyone watching her. It means everything we believed was a lie, she continued. The Americans are not monsters. They are not cruel. They are not evil. They are just people. People who believe in something we did not have in Germany. They believe that every human life has value, even enemy lives, even our lives. Several women nodded, others looked down at their hands. And if they can see us as human, Margaret said, her voice breaking slightly, then maybe we need to start seeing ourselves that way too. Not as Germans or enemies or prisoners, just as people who deserve kindness, even from ourselves. Anna Muller stood up. I agree, she said. For the first time in my life, I feel like I am allowed to be human. Not a tool. Not a servant of the state. Just human. And I am grateful for that, even if it came from the people who destroyed my country. The conversation continued late into the night. It was not an easy discussion. There were arguments, tears, moments of anger and denial, but by the end something fundamental had shifted in the room. They were no longer just prisoners waiting to be repatriated. They were women who had been given a second chance at life and were trying to figure out what to do with it. In August 1945, the repatriation orders came. The war in Europe had been over for 3 months. Germany was divided into occupation zones. The process of rebuilding was beginning, and the displaced persons, including the women from the train car, needed to go home. The news was met with mixed reactions. Some women were overjoyed, desperate to reunite with their families. Others were terrified, and a few, like Anna Muller, felt something close to grief. I do not want to leave, Anna confessed to Margaret one evening. They were packing their few possessions into small bags provided by the Red Cross. Is that terrible? I do not want to go back to Germany. Margaret shook her head. It is not terrible. It is honest. Here we are safe. We are fed. We are treated like people. Out there, she gestured vaguely toward the window, toward Germany. Out there is rubble and starvation and judgment. My family will ask me where I have been, Anna said quietly. They will ask me what happened. And when I tell them that the Americans saved my life, that they fed me and cared for me and treated me with kindness, they will not believe me. Or worse, they will think I am a traitor. Then do not tell them everything, Margaret suggested. Tell them you survived. That is enough. But Anna shook her head. No, I will tell them. Someone needs to tell the truth, even if they do not want to hear it. The departure was scheduled for August 20th. The night before, the Americans organized a farewell gathering. There was food, of course. There was always food. Coffee and cake donated by American supply chains. A small band played American swing music. Some of the women danced with American soldiers, awkward and hesitant, but real. Dr. Mitchell stood at the edge of the room watching. She had treated these women when they were half dead. She had watched them recover, physically and psychologically, and now she was watching them prepare to leave, to step back into a world that would not understand what they had experienced. Margaret approached her. Doctor, she said in careful English, I want to thank you. For everything. Mitchell smiled. You do not need to thank me. I was just doing my job. No, Margaret said firmly. Was more than job. You give me back my life, and you give me back my humanity. I will never forget that. Mitchell felt tears prick her eyes. What will you do? When you go back to Germany? Margaret thought for a moment. I will rebuild, like everyone else. I will find my family. I will help my country heal. But I will never forget what I learned here. That enemies can show mercy. That kindness is stronger than hate. That every human life has value. She paused, then added quietly, and I will teach these things to my children, so that maybe one day there will be no more enemies, just people. The next morning, the buses arrived. 83 women climbed aboard, carrying their small bags and their heavy memories. They waved goodbye to the American soldiers who had saved them. Some cried, some smiled. All of them carried something they had not brought with them, hope. As the buses pulled away from the camp, Anna Miller looked back through the rear window. The Americans were still standing there, waving. She raised her hand in return, then turned forward toward whatever future awaited her in the ruins of Germany. In her pocket was her journal, filled with months of observations and revelations. On the last page, she had written one final entry that morning. Today I leave captivity, but I am freer now than I ever was before, because now I know the truth, and the truth, terrible and beautiful as it is, has set me free. Margaret Hoffman returned to Hamburg and found her family living in the basement of a bombed-out building. She worked as a translator for the British occupation forces, using her improved English skills. She married an American journalist in 1948 and moved to Boston, where she lived until her death in 2003. In her later years, she gave numerous interviews about her experience. She spoke at schools, at veterans organizations, at peace conferences. She always told the same story, about 12 days in hell and 3 months learning what humanity truly meant. The soap, she would say, is what I remember most. Not the starvation, not the fear, the soap. Because it represented everything my government had failed to teach me. That even enemies deserve dignity. That kindness is not weakness. That mercy is the truest form of strength. Anna Müller stayed in Munich. She became a teacher, focusing on history and ethics. She never married, dedicating her life instead to education. She kept her journal from the camp until she died in 1989, just months before the Berlin Wall fell. In her will, she donated it to a Holocaust museum with a note that read, so that future generations will know that healing is possible, even after the worst humanity can do. Of the 83 women who left that camp in August 1945, 71 survived to see the reunification of Germany in 1990. Many of them stayed in contact, writing letters, attending reunions, supporting each other through the decades of rebuilding. They never forgot what happened in that train car. But more importantly, they never forgot what happened after. The moment when their enemies became their saviors. The moment when hatred was replaced by hope. And so the soap became more than soap. The bread became more than bread. The kindness became more than kindness. They became proof that even in the darkest moments of human history, even when nations are locked in total war, even when propaganda has poisoned every mind, humanity can still break through. The women in that train car were starving. The Americans found them half dead. But what the Americans gave them was not just food or medical care or shelter. They gave them back their humanity. And that, more than any weapon or strategy or victory, is what won the war that truly mattered. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. These buried accounts of World War II remind us that even in humanity's darkest hours, compassion and dignity can prevail. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story from history that deserves to be remembered.